guys, so today I'm bringing you my monthly wrap-up for the month of August. I've decided to switch to wrap-ups over the batch reviews. I know last month you guys were inundated with batch reviews as I got through the 20 books that I read while I was in Toronto without Wi-Fi. So yeah, I decided that because I'm not reading that crazy amount every month, I would switch to wrap-ups, and then I tended to limit my batch reviews to about 5 books, and this way I'm not limited to a specific number of books. So to get started with what I read in August, I firstly reread Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, as some of you know if you watch my TBR. This was a buddy read with Lauren and Steve from Steve Read Books and Erica, although I think Lauren and I were the only two who actually read this, and so it was really just a conversation between Lauren and I. But yeah, I reread this because I didn't enjoy this when I read this in high school. It was ruined for me. I've mentioned many times I had an awful English department at my high school. So I am trying to rehabilitate some of the works that those so-called teachers ruined for me. But yes, Jane Eyre, I enjoyed it much more this time. I will give you guys that. But I still find it really problematic. Like, Rochester's a dick. I do not like Rochester. I am unhappy that she ended up with him. I think that's why I prefer Villette to Jane Eyre. In Fillmore, Lucy Snow is a much more, to me, even though she's really unreliable and she's kind of unlikable, I prefer her to Jane Eyre. Although I do like Jane Eyre, I forgot quite how independent she is, so I really enjoyed that. And I followed up reading Jane Eyre, and this probably compounded my dislike of Rochester, with Jean Rhys's Wide Circles of Sea, which tells the story of Rochester's wife, Bertha, as he deems her, but her real name is actually Antoinette, and it's actually part of Rochester's dehumanizing her that he names her Bertha, and it tells of her story before when she's on the island. I forget which island she's on, but she's on one of the Caribbean islands, and she is Creole, so she is a mix of black and white, and this deals with colonialism, and Lauren and I talked about this because when we were reading Jane Eyre, and I'm going to put Jane Eyre down because it's heavy, and she was worried about reading what a lot of people would consider fan fiction to Jane Eyre, and it's not in any way, shape, or form. The tone is entirely different. It's much more sexual. It's much more critical of the society. It looks at the problems with colonialism. It looks at the problems of slavery. It is a very slim volume. I would definitely recommend it. I actually preferred this much more than Jane Eyre. I loved the character of Antoinette. I still hated Rochester. I actually hated Rochester even more when reading this. So yes, I would definitely recommend this. If you like Jane Eyre and want to read more, it's not fan fiction in any way, shape, or form. It is, you don't actually even really know that, they never mention Rochester's name. They, yeah, it's it's fantastic. Next up is one that has been being talked about on BookTube quite a lot, and that is John Burnside's The Dumb House. I read this because Jen Campbell talked about this, and she talked about it, and she's like, oh, I'm really excited for this, and I'm like, oh, I'm really curious. She described it as Perfume and Lolita and a couple other books had a baby, and it was fantastic, and so I picked this up, and oh my god, guys, this book is so messed up. It's kind of a fairy tale retelling, but in a very messed up way. It's also part of Vintage's basically re-releasing a bunch of Scottish modern classics. This was published in 1997, so it is considered a modern classic. And it tells the story of Luke, and as a child his mother told him the story of the Dumb House, where the book gets its name from, which is basically a house where children were raised by people who were mute, so they were never exposed to language. And the theory behind this is that they would form the one true language, and that the other languages were basically debased versions of the one true language that God gave us. So Luke becomes fascinated with this as an adult, and this isn't a spoiler because this literally is one of the first lines. He experiments on children. to try and see if they will form their own language. This book has a lot of trigger warnings. There is rape, there is animal cruelty, there is cruelty to children, there is cruelty to women, there is cruelty to everyone. Luke is not a likable character. What is so great about this is that Burnside's prose allows you to identify with Luke, and it's really creepy. Like, really creepy. I was talking to Jen as I read this, and basically she would get on Voxer little like 6-minute snippets like, oh my god, this just happened and I can't even like process it. And like there would be like 20 of them and she'd come back and she's like, it's great. I know exactly what part you're reading. And it really messes with your brain because you do identify with Luke. He is an awful person. You can rationalize the fact that he is totally an awful person, but because Burnside's writing is so excellent, you still end up identifying with him and kind of understanding where he's coming from. And it's absolutely fantastic. This is probably one of my favorite books of this year. Vintage is actually currently giving it away on their YouTube page, so I will provide a link in the description below. Hopefully it's not over by the time I get around to posting this video, but I would highly recommend it. Also, I love the vintage red classics. This is my first vintage red spine. I've never bought them before, and I actually ended up buying 2 this month, so I'm pretty excited about that. So I have another reread on my list, one that I read a really long time ago, but I thought it would be kind of fun to talk about, and that is 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff. This is a series of letters. This is non-fiction, not something I often read on this channel, and it is a series of letters between Helen and Frank. Helen is a screenwriter who lives in New York City, and Frank is a bookseller in London. This takes place after World War II, when London is under a series of like they're on restrictions. I can't think of a better way to put that. Basically on what they can buy, and a lot of what they talk about is the restrictions that they're on. Helen sends a lot of gift baskets to the bookshop to try and help them out, like eggs and things like that. And this, it's a really interesting way to look at how books were bought before the internet, because when I buy books, I look for specific editions, and I look up the ISBN, and I go on Book Depository or Wordery or Amazon or Chapters, and I find the edition in the cheapest, and I just order it and it comes directly to my house. But this is a series of letters back and forth between Helen and Frank, basically Helen requesting books and Frank sending them over, and how their relationship develops over years. And sometimes you don't, because it's in book format, you don't realize that there's a delay of some months between their letters, and like the way that I just find it so fascinating, because it's a way that we don't normally communicate, and I really like writing letters and pen paling and stuff like that, so I found this quite interesting. I would definitely recommend it. It's a very slim volume. It's like, I think it's not even 100 pages. Maybe it's just under 100 pages. So pick this up if you like books about books and you like stories about booksellers and things like that. So last up is my other red vintage spine that I got, and that is Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. I read this because Mercedes was talking about it, and she was saying it was one of her favorite books that she read like a couple of years ago, and I was like, I had seen it when I was in Toronto. They had the movie tie-in edition, and I was like, do I want to buy it? It was like $4 in Toronto, and it was the movie tie-in edition, and I was like, I was with a friend, and she's like, oh, the movie was crap, like, don't get it. So then I was talking about it with Mercedes, and she loved it, and I saw that they had this vintage edition, and I decided to wait and order it online. This tells the story of Frank and Alice Wheeler, and they live in the suburbs outside of, I'm pretty sure it's New York City, and they have 2 young children, and it's basically all about their dissatisfaction with their life and the lifestyle choices they have made. Frank was, like, when he was younger, was like the person in university who everybody thinks is going to go really far, and then ends up not really making a name for himself, and he's working for the same company that his dad worked for, and it's a dead-end job and he hates it. And Alice wanted to be an actress, and she kind of fails at that, and it's basically they hate each other at this point. They do not communicate well, they don't get on well, and it's a really sad and tragic story, but it's very much a like 1950s suburbia white people problem. So it's not for everyone. I would not recommend this book to everyone. The characters are awful. You guys know how much I love my despicable characters. Frank in particular is just absolutely, like, you hate him. And there's no, it's unlike John Burnside where you can't identify with Frank. Frank is awful. He is horrible. Alice you can identify with a little bit, but she's still pretty awful. Like, it's just, but it's so well written that you kind of end up loving it, even though it's awful. I couldn't read this in like large spurts. I would do like a couple chapters every day and then set it aside because it was really depressing to read, but I really enjoyed it. Weirdly enough, yes guys, I like depressing novels about horrible people. I know. But yes, I would recommend this if you like looking, like if you like basically navel-gazing white people stories. If you like that, this is a book for you. Clearly I do, so I gave it 4 stars. I quite enjoyed it. But that is my wrap up for the books I read in August, and I will see you guys in another video. Bye.